child, I was super afraid of the dark, an experience that I'm sure many people share, but we're always told that we'll grow out of it, that it's a childish thing, and somewhere along the line, it became harder to notice. I could stand in a dark hallway in my house without my spine tingling or any urge to run away. But I never came to understand that fear, if that makes sense. I never knew why I was afraid of the dark, and it is this particular question that I want to take a look at. Alright, can we first acknowledge just how justified fear of the dark is? Like, being in a room where you can't see anything is already a hazard, even in places where you're familiar with, like your own house. Now, place yourself in an unfamiliar place and... yeah, no thanks. And that's why I think video games are so interesting in this respect. I said that I grew out of being scared of the dark, but that was a lie. The problem with identifying this fear, at least for me, is that there's often something else that is causing me to feel uneasy.
What's the noise? What is that? Oh!
Take this example from Lethal Company. A valve has popped and I can't see anything. I'm not necessarily afraid of steam, but rather, what if there's a monster or a mine? And this is something we can see a lot of in cases where darkness is a core part of the game.
I think it's coming. Oh, it's coming. Flashing.
Darkness is one of the defining characteristics of horror games, but it is one that I think is often overlooked because of just how often it is used. In most cases, a horror game is going to be dark and have some kind of flashlight. It's almost baked into the genre at this point. But it's not just its frequency that caused darkness to be overlooked. It's that darkness is so much of a hindrance. I don't think it's very fun to not be able to see the game you're playing, and sometimes we just don't have the patience to kiss a wall for an entire game. Having the game be dark is usually just to make things hard to see and slow the pacing down, and that can get old pretty fast. I think it's a lot more interesting when darkness poses a direct danger to you and isn't just a proxy to make you unnerved. Okay, for those of you who don't know, Minecraft has a gimmick where monsters will spawn in the darkness, which you can prevent by lighting up the area. I'm sure there were other games that played with this idea of darkness, but Minecraft was the first for me. But Minecraft does something interesting in that it makes you actively engage with the darkness. And there's a distinction we can make here. Monsters appear from darkness, not nighttime. My poorly lit house is just as safe as a spooky cave. Minecraft isn't a horror game, I think that is indisputable, regardless of how creepy it can feel. But this idea that even the most intimate parts of our life, like a house, aren't completely safe, is something that a lot of horror games explore. I think it's the reason why so many horror games in a post-PT world situate themselves in houses. These are spaces that are supposed to feel safe, welcoming. But the thing is, I don't live here. This isn't my house. So from the get-go, there is already a sense of unfamiliarity and caution. Exploring a stranger's rundown home can be scary, but it's often the pristine locations that feel more eerie to me. A really good example of this is Visage. It's contained within this mostly benign home, the protagonist's home, not the player's.
Hello, Dwayne. It's Rose, your neighbor.
And quite quickly you might feel that something isn't right about this house, yet it looks relatively normal. A big part of this is the beginning of the game. Immediately you can probably tell that something is wrong about this house, The house acts as both the game's hub, but also its levels, and we are immediately susceptible to the game's mechanics. But at least from the start, you are completely safe. Yes, paranormal events do happen, but you are at no risk of actually dying. I find it interesting that we are presented with a dangerous space that turns out to be mostly benign, but moments later it is flipped on its head and any safety we felt is also overturned. I think it's clear to say that darkness has a lot to do with the unknown and uncertain. In the beginning of the article Nyctophobia, from imagined to realistic fears of the dark, Levos and Zacchellini describe fear as a quick response which allows for a reply to an imminent threat. But as they point out later, Nyctophobia is unique in that there isn't always an imminent threat. Darkness obscures our vision, and it is this lack of visual stimuli that causes this buildup of anxiety. Yes, there isn't always imminent danger, but what if there is something hiding in darkness? We'll never know. The darkness puts us all at higher risk of victimization. We are more vulnerable. There's this game called The Voidness that takes this idea of obscuring vision and makes it its entire gimmick. The game takes place in the void, a very fitting name, because you can't see anything. To combat this, the game provides a so-called particle scanner to reveal the environment, and it looks pretty good, right? But the scanner doesn't reveal things in perfect clarity. It isn't a one-to-one depiction of something. Any moving object needs to be continuously scanned, and even then, it can be very hard to tell what exactly it is doing, in the same way that darkness obscures dangers. The voidness hides its horrors in this skewed version of reality, not a very hopeful situation when you're trying to run from monsters you can't see. And yet, we hold onto the scanner because there really isn't an option without it. I mean, you can choose to play without it, but it doesn't really go through. In a similar vein, the game Resonance Chain also presents through an abstraction of reality. Like the Voidness, Resonance Chain is pitch black, but gives the player the ability to half see things. Think of it as PT but with echolocation, so you can see things through sound that resonates from the player and some of the sounds in your environment. For me, it was the sounds that I couldn't see that were far more unsettling. Moments where blood drips from a corpse or a baby cries from a box were not that bad because it had a very clear origin and really stood out amongst the darkness. But when you stop showing us that sound's origin and take away that one guarantee of clarity, it makes us feel more isolated and vulnerable. But I think it's more than just exposing us to some unknown threat. There's something unsettling about a horror game clearly going against its established rules and mechanics. Not all sounds can be seen, and not everything we see comes from sound. Distant footsteps of something unknown approaching. The red eyes of victims staring back at us when everything else we see relies on sound. These inferences stand out from our established norms and are horrifying. Horror is often about tension. Creating and inflicting that tension on the player. And to that end, we can see how surrounding the player with unknown threats can continuously build unease in a more subtle way. But there are more direct ways that darkness can contribute to endangering the player. There are a few ways we can look at this, but the most well-known, and one you've probably heard of, is the idea of a sanity system. One of the first big games to utilize a sanity system is Amnesia: The Dark Descent. The implementation of a sanity system creates tension not just on an emotional level through the player, but also through gameplay. Maybe I can't speak for everyone, but there are definitely moments when my vision has been obscured in a horror game, and I've been hesitant to move forward. In a strange way, a sanity system acts like this proverbial obscured vision. Sanity and darkness go hand in hand in that prolonged exposure to darkness often reduces sanity. It plays a part in dictating our actions and decisions in horror games, but also serves as a constant reminder of danger. Amnesia took this a step further because dealing with both darkness and sanity requires the expending of resources. Avoiding the darkness was fine until your lantern ran out of fuel, and eventually you collapse. Sometimes I wonder if these effects reflect the intended experience of the player when interacting with darkness. It should debilitate us, make us panic, make us scared. In my experience, this rarely is the case in practice, but it does make me wonder as to the efficacy of such a mechanic. The sanity mechanic has in many ways transcended Amnesia and taken its place within many games, even those that do not share a genre. Phasmophobia, Don't Starve, and Visage come to mind. And so it was admittedly a bit of a shock that the sanity mechanic and the effects of darkness on the player never really make another appearance in the series. Amnesia: The Bunker does use darkness in its own unique way, where cranking your flashlight creates noise that attracts the monster. In this way, preventing darkness poses real harm to us. And maybe it's for this reason that the sanity mechanic never made it to the bunker. It would have been too punishing and tedious. But I think it would have made for a very unique challenge and created an interesting dynamic between us and our benign light cube. Amnesia's lantern is perhaps one of the most recognizable tools in all the video games.
Aiden say is Macca's and
despite being so simple, because as mentioned earlier, constantly hugging a wall for an entire game is not fun. We need some sort of light source to balance things out, but there's a fine line to be drawn when meeting light and dark. There is a limit to the clarity that light provides. It creates a warped depiction of reality that shows and obscures dangers. It highlights the darkness that envelops us.